Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, good to be back with you here again. I wanted to take a quick look here and show you what I found looking closer into this NCAA database that we're using. Hopefully, this will be somewhat visible for you. The football manager or editor is not necessarily well designed for videos like this, but we'll take a look and see what this looks like. So we go ahead and open up the editor. I've wanted to do a series of videos on the editor itself, but honestly, I don't spend that much time using it. So that's the reason why I haven't done so far. And for some reason, it's putting me into full screen mode right now. So there you have it. So we open up the editor here. I've noticed before, I've told you before that because I'm using Linux, I have to have the editor files in a completely different directory structure than the game itself because of how Proton works for reasons. Anyway, we'll go in here and we'll load this up. It's going to take a couple of minutes for this to load because of all of the data changes that have taken place as part of this editor data file. So we'll give it a couple of minutes here and wait for it to go ahead and load up. I mean, it really is remarkable the sort of the length and the breadth of the changes that have taken place. But we'll go ahead and we'll take a close look into this, and we may be able to discover some of the issues that are preventing us from having like any sort of meaningful transfer window and so on and so forth. I mean, it's pretty cool. If I had a lot of time on my hands, which I don't, and if I had the interest in really learning how the editor works, which I don't necessarily have, I would spend a whole bunch of time in it and try to figure out exactly how all this stuff works and maybe come up with something on my own. I mean, we have a little bit over 700,000 changes to the database, which is quite a few. So if you go down here to advanced rules, go down to list, then USA. This is where we can see the stuff that's interesting to us. We go here to transfer, and we can learn all sorts of things about how transfers work. So first, we'll look over here at work permit rules, because this is the thing that came up the other day. Again, my apologies for this being way too small. I have no idea how to change the settings here to make it so that this is more visible. There must be a way to do this. I'm sure somebody will tell me. I mean, this is so small that I have a hard time reading it. So if you look really, really closely up here, though, you can see that there are work permit rules. Work permit rules for new players. Decision date is immediate, so there's no wait, which is not that realistic. The decision type is based on potential ability, and the threshold is 200. In other words, the only way a foreign player, is going to get a work permit is if they have a potential ability of 200, which is just not going to happen, right? So what we have here is a save that is designed to be sort of xenophobic, right, in that sense. You can have new gens created that come from other countries, yes, but these are all going to be players who are within America. In other words, you can't go out and use your list of, this is your, I don't know, your favorite Wonder Kids or whatever from around the world. That's not going to happen. Now, I want to talk about that briefly. I mean, it sort of depends upon how you like playing the game and what you want to do. I think that the creator, what's his name, Samba23, I think that this is probably the sort of person who likes to play games in which we do nothing but youth development, and transfers are not such a major part of things, right? I would say, though, that when it comes to this particular thing, at least the way that I enjoy playing Football Manager is much different. I like the idea of having scouts go look around the world and come up with good players that we can then use. If you're playing with this database, there's no point in scouting anything outside of the United States, because you can't sign any of the players, right? You're not going to find a player with a potential ability of 200 in the game, because they're so rare that, I mean, it's just not going to happen, and you're not going to have the money to buy them anyway. So, I mean, if you play this database, don't even give it a try. It's not really worth it. I would question whether it's really even worth it to purchase scouts, right? We can go ahead and go back here and look at some things I actually haven't looked at before. So what have I clicked on here? Transfer windows. There's one transfer window that goes from, I mean, for whatever reason, it's set up for 2,000. I don't know why. Who cares? But yeah, it says that, it's a transfer window that lasts like maybe 6 weeks. 4 transfers allowed. That's it. Right. So there you go. 4 transfers allowed overall. I'm just going to look through this really quickly and see. Free transfers can join anytime. So theoretically, you can sign a free transfer anytime you want. I'm not certain, though, if that actually is the case or not. We can play around with that and figure out if that actually is true or not. And we can go over here and see if there are any major loan rules. And it's really simple. I mean, you can have 8 players out on loan this season. You can have 8 players come in on loan in the season as well. And that's basically it. We can go ahead over here and take a look at competitions. I was looking earlier at the early season tournaments, trying to figure out what the rules are for them, and I discovered that I could not. Uh, there we go. I couldn't get the early season tournament rules to actually display in the game for some reason. It would force the game to quit, which is a sign that something is not right. um, Looking through this really quickly to see if there's any sort of information or anything like that going on, and it looks like there's not much. Again, I'm not an expert here on how this works. So it looks like what we found here is something that's a little bit unuseful for, or not useful for our purposes. We can take a look here at all the many database changes here right before the end of the video, and this will end this out. So, I mean, yeah, there you have it. That's sort of the way that this is set up. Now, I will say that the idea behind this database is interesting, and it's not bad to have this sort of setup. My biggest criticism of it so far, though, and I'll make it so you don't have to watch that processing screen. My biggest criticism of it so far, and yeah, this isn't going to show us very much at all. My biggest criticism so far of this is the sort of draconian way that transfers are restricted, right? So the problem with this database is that you have game after game after game after game because of all of these cool tournaments that the guys set up, right? If you read the original thread, you can have, I think it's up to like 70 games for an individual team. We're just going to quit it because there's nothing interesting to see there in database changes. You can have up to something like 70 or some odd games, for an individual team in a season, and a lot of them are 2 games per week, but you will never have a squad that is above like maybe 20 something players, right? Even if you take your under 19s and put them on your squad. And the reason why is because you can't buy players, right? You can buy up to 4 players in a transfer window from other teams. And then I suppose if you're fortunate enough to find them, you can buy players who are in the United States currently on a free transfer, and that's it. I was trying to buy players on free transfers from abroad, and it wouldn't work because they can't get a work permit, right? So, like, I kind of understand it, right? But we're going to likely run into problems as a result because this hasn't, I hate to say it like this, but it hasn't really been well thought through, right? If you're playing this number of games, one after another, in this tournament, that tournament, and you have this type of competition, that type of competition, there's something like 4 major tournaments every year and all this stuff, right? You need to be able to have the players so that you can play the games, right? I mean, if the player base isn't there, or if there's some artificial restriction on transfers that prevent you from acquiring players, I mean, it's just not going to work. It's not going to happen. So that's sort of my take on this. I mean, I'd love to know kind of what you think about it, right? It's fun. It's an interesting challenge. It's a different way of looking at things. But in particular, the inability to sign players from abroad, for me at least, really takes a lot of the joy and the fun out of doing the transfers themselves, right? I mean, I'm not aware of a lot of people who like playing sort of like xenophobic type football manager, right? And there's a reason why you don't see a lot of databases out there with these sorts of rules. Anyway, though, there you go. I figured that this might be somewhat helpful to those who are considering playing with this database in the future so that you have an idea of what really happens. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, especially these transfer restrictions, were not mentioned by the creator in the original videos. I mean, still much props to, Samba23 for creating this, huge data file with all of these changes. But, things like the way that transfers work, it would be kind of nice if you would let people know about that ahead of time instead of just, sort of making this happen and letting us find out the hard way, right? I mean, if you're going to restrict transfers to this level, well, why not just turn them off completely like you did with your earlier database, right? And then we know that it's a youth, it's basically a youth development, youth intake save. I mean, because practically speaking, that's the only way you can play anyway, right? And again, as I said before in a previous video, there's this question about, oh, well, why is it that the computer manager is not spending more of its wage budget, or why is it that every team has this transfer budget left over? Well, it's obvious, right? You can't spend it. There's no possible way for you to spend the transfer budget because you can't purchase players from abroad, right? I suppose maybe you could spend the whole budget on one guy that you get over, but I mean, judging from what their wage structure is like in game, the wages are not going to be paid out even over the course of time. You're going to continuously see teams with a large wage budget, and unfortunately, as I learned today, it's not so easy to convince the board to improve youth facilities and to improve other things like that, youth recruitment and so on, which is bizarre because that's the only way that you can create players and develop them in this game. So my guess is that there are a lot of problems here that have not really been thought through all that deeply, right? Because if the boards are all reluctant to make these improvements, you're going to have teams that just sit on piles of cash that they don't spend. And, the only way you're going to attract better youth players is by watching your reputation slowly increase from the insane number of tournaments you're playing. Like I said, not really that well thought through. I think that we probably could use, going back to the drawing board and writing this out somewhere and thinking about like how the game's mechanics actually work. Anyway, we're going to keep going with it, like I said, and we'll see how far we get with it as I wait somewhat impatiently for Dave, the editor, to get something done for us. Anyway, talk to you later. Bye.